You're very welcome to the Firm and Fast Golf podcast. I'm your host, Shane Derby. Today we're joined by Michael Cocking. Mike's a partner at the Melbourne-based Ogilvy, Cocking and Mead Golf Course Design Company, a former elite amateur who came through the Victorian Institute of Sport pathway. Mike was the Victorian Amateur Champion in the year 2000. He also held the first round lead at the Australian Masters in 2001, ultimately finishing tied 6th behind Colin Montgomery. Despite flirting with the idea of a pro career, serendipity seems to have been in play when Mike Clayton Golf Design were commissioned to work at Cocking's home club of Peninsula. Mike picked up a part-time job on the project, and this decision would lead him towards the bright lights of golf course architecture and ultimately a partnership in his own firm. OCM, his design firm, have a serious renovation and restoration back catalogue in Australia, including Kingston Heath, Victoria, Peninsula Kingswood, Royal Queensland, RACV Healesville and Bonnie Doon, to name but a few, in addition to Yangtze Dunes, the number 1 ranked course in China. Over the past few years, OCM have made inroads into the United States through an initial commission at Shady Oaks in Texas. This project undoubtedly led onwards to the preparation and acceptance of a master plan for the iconic number 3 course at Medina, which incidentally is due to host the President's Cup in 2026. These successes have no doubt aided a number of additional opportunities in the United States, which we will hear more about today. OCM are amongst a coming wave of contemporary golf designers that are investing the appropriate time and effort in building their own work with their own people, and in so doing they are maximising a limited output reflective of all that is good in an arts and crafts approach to conceptualising, building and finishing golf courses. We really do hope you enjoy the show. Hi Mike, you're very welcome to the Firm and Fast Golf podcast.
Thank you, Shane.
I know you've been racking up the frequent flyer air miles of late. Where do we find you today?
Well, I'm home at the moment, so I'm actually in Melbourne.
Woohoo!
Which is nice. Since probably we've got a few projects in America, which is terrific. But as a result, I've sort of been commuting basically. So 2 or 3 weeks in America and then 2 weeks home. And I've been doing that since kind of November or December, I guess, November. But my wife, she works with BP, and their head office is in London. So so we've kind of ships in the night. She's disappeared to London, so I'm home for about a 4-week period, which is really nice. So looking after the kids and getting a few things done that I just need kind of time to think about. So it's good.
Yeah. I know that you're in midwinter over in Melbourne at the moment, and I understand it's a great time for golf in Melbourne. However, seeing some recent pictures of you on Twitter straddling continents, as you alluded to there, I'm assuming you've probably not had too many recent opportunities to play any sandbelt golf.
No, I played twice at Peninsula a month and a half ago, and I'm not sure I've played around since Christmas other than that. So yeah, it's pathetic, I know.
Well, in terms of doing some research for this particular chat, it sounds like golf is a bit like riding a bike to you. So no problem with you taking extended leave and still being able to find the centre of the club face.
Yeah, as long as I get a hit or two on the range beforehand, it's okay. It's generally all right.
Yeah.
So,
for sure. Listen, we might bring you back to the days of watching Nick Faldo and Curtis Strange in your grandparents' house. Yeah. I believe a Harrison Ford and Nick Faldo fascination developed. Would initially obviously lead you in a golfing direction. I believe you took the game up with your dad at the same time. In hindsight, this seems to have been a great decision, as you'd go on to become the Victorian Amateur Champion in the year 2000, and the following year in 2001, you'd hold the first round lead at the Australian Masters at Huntingdale, which incidentally, I believe you've got the commission there to renovate the golf course. So all very exciting. Yeah. Ultimately, obviously, you finished sixth place behind the winner, Colin Montgomery. Obviously, it's clear you could play a bit. I'm just wondering how much influence did the opportunity to travel in Europe with, I believe, a borrowed copy of Tom Doak's Confidential Guide. How much of an influence did that opportunity have in your career path and the ultimate decision to forgo a professional playing career?
It was a big factor, kind of a sliding doors moment, I guess. But I was a good golfer. I wasn't like, a once in a generation kind of golfer. I was decent. And I traveled, I was in the Australian team and state teams and things. And so I got to travel, but it was just kind of pre-internet. So, and my boss, I just worked part-time at a golf shop, and he happened to come upon a copy of Tom's book. It was the one before, so it was the one in the burgundy cover. So Tom did that limited edition. He did a really limited edition for some very close friends, which apparently was brutal. And then
Have you seen any of that content?
I haven't, no, I've heard about it, but apparently it was like, he absolutely just ripped some well-known architects.
No filter whatsoever.
No, none whatsoever. And then I think the burgundy one had some edits. And then when it went to commercial production, it had more edits. It was softened again, which is the one with the
sanitized.
Yeah, which is the one with the the picture of him and the dog heading off for, I think it's him anyway. So it was back to the point. So it was pre-internet, and to be honest, I was all in on golf. Like up until about the time Pat Cash won Wimbledon, I wanted to be a professional tennis player. My dad was a good tennis player. He was just a good sports person. He was good at baseball, good at tennis, whatever. And I loved tennis. I was all in. And then, I would get dropped off at my grandparents' house before school because my parents were teachers and had to get to their places of work earlier than I had to start. So I was there for an hour every morning. And I'd watch just whatever on TV. But one of these mornings I was flicking through and the golf was on, and it was the 88 US Open, Curtis Strange and Faldo. And it was the last round. And I was into sport. It's not like I didn't know what golf was, but it was a thrilling finish. And so it really captivated me. And they tied. And the best thing was the next day I got to watch it again. So I watched the playoff. And that was the time I really became interested in the game. My parents had both, like a lot of people, I guess, midlife, decided, maybe I'll take up golf. And they used to drag my sister and I along on weekends for their lesson and 9 holes. And we hated it because we had to walk around the golf course. And I was probably, 8 or 9 and wasn't interested. But as a result, that they had their clubs still, and the clubs were kind of in the attic. And so after this sort of Curtis Strange Faldo duel, and you're right, I was barracking for Faldo because I thought he looked like Harrison Ford. So I was shattered that he lost. We found these clubs, or I found these clubs and just started knocking them around the backyard. We had a property that it wasn't huge, but it was there was a bit of a backyard, so I could there were some plastic balls, and I just kind of started chipping around and swinging. And my dad saw that and saw that I was interested, and we sort of then went to a driving range, and suddenly with me being interested, it was a reason for him to perhaps take it up again. And that was kind of the journey, into golf. This is a very rambling answer to your question, so I apologize. But so then to get back to the Doak thing, I was working at a golf shop, got this copy of Tom's book, and it was around the time that I was into some, state teams and national teams and things. And really, at that point, pre-internet, it was very difficult to read reviews of golf courses that weren't puff pieces. Everything, if you think about it, was, all the magazines where they were usually virtually paid adverts. And so there was never anything critical written about a golf course. And to be honest, there was never anything really about the architecture. It was all about the experience or the aesthetics or the condition of the golf course. And I guess there were some architecture books around, but I wasn't aware of them because it wasn't, in my sphere. And when he gave me Tom's book to read, and I found it so refreshing that here was this book that kind of stripped back. It exposed me to architecture. I'd never really thought about it that much. to be honest, at that point, I probably judged golf courses on their condition. If they're beautiful fairways and greens and what have you, I was probably swayed by that. And I didn't realize there was more to it. And so Tom's book, suddenly I'm reading these reviews. It was particularly pertinent when he talked about the Australian courses because I knew about them. And then when I started going on these trips, I would write away, because it was pre-internet. So I wrote letters to Swinley Forest, and I wrote letters to Sunningdale and Dornoch and you name it. Wherever I had a tournament, I was playing the St Andrews Links Trophy, and I arranged to go and see 3 or 4 different courses in the area. And then we were playing in the north of England, and I'd, right away to, some other, we were playing in Blackpool. And so, obviously the courses in the area, and same in Ireland. So I started getting exposure and seeing these courses. Most of the clubs were generally fantastic. I found if you wrote away and didn't cold call, they were so supportive, and I'd kind of explained to them that I was interested in design as well as being a good player. And most of them I played, some of them I walked, just took photos, and that was kind of that developed the love of architecture, I guess. And then jumping ahead, it was when I sort of made the trek to the UK perhaps 5 times in 4 years, maybe. And so playing all those major events. And I was keen on a career as a professional, but I'd had a few injuries. I had my wrist operated on a couple of times, and that was very frustrating. And I had this sort of deep appreciation of architecture. And it was on one of the last trips. I remember I was trying to qualify for the British Open. My dad was actually caddying for me. He was over there on a holiday, and I remember I was ahead of the cut line with 2 holes to go. I was playing Camberley Heath, and it's a blind, 17th, I think, was a blind par 4 over a hill. And he put my bag up over the hill on the right, and I went back and hit my shot. And a couple of spectators bailed me up and said, "Oh, your ball actually hit your bag with your tee shot." 2-shot penalty, missed by 1. And it was just, I guess I was always sort of on the edge of, being a professional didn't sit that well with me, to be honest. I didn't love the idea of, 1 minute you've got a career, the next minute you're out of work. I loved design. I was sort of torn, and that was kind of the tipping point. It was I don't know whether I really want to keep doing this. And when I got home, I wrote a letter to Mike Clayton, who I knew through sort of the amateur circuit. And their company, to that point, it was probably a bit of a hobby is the wrong word, but it wasn't their full-time job. Like, they were just starting out. They each of the 3 directors each had other jobs that, they derived income from. And so it was a bit of a, it was something that they loved doing, but it wasn't a full-time career. And they'd just won the job to do a master plan at my then home club, Peninsula. And I think they sort of could justify having someone kind of give them a hand with some things. It was a part-time job. I was kind of juggling, still playing golf and this as well. And so that was really the start of it. So, but very much right place, right time. I've since spoken to so many people that want to get into the industry, and I try and be as giving as possible, but there's just so few jobs, and I consider myself so lucky that I was just there in the right place.
Yeah, I mean, you've nicely sashayed into the next question, so, as you said. Well, so kudos, making my life very easy. I understand the Peninsula, as you say, commissioned Mike Clayton and his partners Bruce Grant and John Sloan to carry out a course renovation project towards the end of the 1990s. Yeah. Obviously, this decision, you being in the right place at the right time, enabled you to pick up the part-time job on the renovation crew. Just wondering, what are your abiding memories about those first few days in the office and on site?
Well, it was a very steep learning curve, trying to, I guess, then, and it's advice I've given to others, I just tried to be a bit like a sponge, really. It was a very interesting company because the 3 partners brought quite different skills to the table. You had Mike, who well-travelled, very good golfer, great golfing sort of brain, almost a photographic memory, I would say, on many elements, and good with a lot of the theory on, he's well read on design. John happened to fall in, I don't know whether it was by choice or by design, but he kind of ended up basically running the company. He was the managing director. He had a good business brain, but he was an excellent turf manager. So he'd become a highly sought after consultant. And so from him, I learned so much about turf. I didn't know the science of turf. And so, and in what we do, it's so valuable. You can't just think about what we do in terms of design and, the geometry of positioning bunkers. I mean, there is such a close relationship between, turf management and design. And so I learned a lot about, turf and construction techniques, and even just sort of handling yourself in meetings and things. And then Bruce, who sadly is not with us anymore, which makes me, very sad, I don't think he could articulate it as well as others, but he was a great designer and brilliant at building, at constructing. So kind of between the three of them, it was such a great environment to learn. But at the same time, we kind of, around the time I joined, and it wasn't because of me, so within 2 weeks of me joining, Ashley Mead started with them as well. So in many ways, our current company kind of started back then in my mind, because we formed a very close relationship and have sort of been design collaborators ever since. We kind of think very similarly, bounce ideas off each other constantly. And so very early on, we formed a very close relationship, and it was a great period because the company sort of started taking off around that time. So prior to that, it was, like I say, not a hobby, but it wasn't a full-time affair. And then all of a sudden, the work at Peninsula kind of went along and was, viewed in a very favourable light. And then, they got work in Perth and Adelaide and Sydney and Queensland. And it's sort of, there was a 6 or 7 year period there where, we got a lot of work, and we all kind of fed off each other. And they were very giving. They were very, they allowed us a lot of freedom. And I consider myself very fortunate. I got to lead the design. Well, I was the designer at RACV Hillsville, which was a little country golf course that, honestly, if there's 1,600 golf courses in Australia, this would have been somewhere between 1,500 and 1,600. Like, it was a very simple country golf course that happened to be owned by a very profitable company in the RACV. And I remember that when the CEO took over RACV, the first year he took over, they made $1 million. The second year, 40 million. The third year, 80 million. The fourth year, 120 million. And then every year it was 120 million, 140 million. And they were a mutual. So they wouldn't retain the profits. They'd put them back into member services. So suddenly they had this asset in the RACV Country Club. And it's like, well, why wouldn't we upgrade that? So they spent 100 million on the site, beautiful, big new building, accommodation, clubhouse, but golf as well. And, I was 26, and, that was probably 3 of the most enjoyable years in the industry, because you store up, when you first get into it, you've got all these thoughts and ideas about what you like, and if I was ever given the chance, this is what I'd do, and holes that inspire you. And all of a sudden, here I was at 26. The company happened to be busy elsewhere, so I think that probably helped, that I was afforded the chance to just to have at it. So, that was a brilliant opportunity. And there's probably some things you might do differently now, but it really, the only way, it's such a steep learning curve, and the only way you can get to ultimately where we are now is to have those sorts of opportunities. So that was an incredible experience.
Yeah, I think mentioning RACV Healesville, I think you've jumped over my next question. So if I can drag you back to St Andrews Beach, obviously the Mornington Peninsula, which I
Yep,
believe was probably a formative learning experience for you, in addition to what you've just
for
spoken
sure.
about there.
Yep.
Obviously, Tom Doak, Eric Iverson, Brian Slonick were all involved of Renaissance Golf. As I said, you first cut your teeth in the new build project at the St Andrews Beach development on the Mornington Peninsula, which was a Mike Clayton and Tom Doak co-design project. Because first of all, maybe for those listeners not familiar with the Cups Country area on the Mornington Peninsula, which is located some 60 minutes south of Melbourne CBD, perhaps you could tell us why this area is first of all so great for golf.
Yeah, it's not links land, so it's not in the truest sense of the word. It's not the land linking it's not right on the beach. It's actually inland a little bit, and they're bigger scale dunes. They're these huge. I mean, it's called Cups Country because it's kind of like, you turn your palm over, and it's all these sort of. But they're big in scale. They're probably, there's plenty that are between 60 and 100 foot high. There is some small scale movement, but not nothing like you see on really sort of coastal sites close to the water. It's typically broader contours, so it's ideal for golf because the contours are broad enough that you can typically lay out holes across the top of the dune or run through the dune or play over the dune. So it had been looked at previously putting a golf course on this land, and then in sort of 2000 and maybe one, I guess Tom had pitched for the job at the National Golf Club many years prior, before he became well known, and missed out on that opportunity. They ended up going with Norman and Peter Thompson, and there was a chance here with St Andrews Beach that he got into the mix, and then there was an opportunity to maybe we could kind of work together on it. So with Mike, John, and Bruce's company, and then at the same time, Barnbougle came along. So in the end, there was sort of three golf courses. There was the two at St Andrews Beach and Barnbougle, and so they were great opportunities. I got to walk Barnbougle dunes, on Tom's first visit, which was an incredible experience to kind of see how he approached the routing process. And I still remember being just so impressed with, he'd never stepped foot on the site, but he knew intimately what was over every dune. He knew, we didn't have a plan with us either. So he knew the routing he'd come up with was just imprinted in his brain. We were sort of, we were down in a valley and there was a hill in front, and he's sort of talking about, once we get over there, there's going to be a saddle, and then I've got the hole going this way and doing this and doing that. And I was like, wow, it was very impressive. And then at St Andrews Beach, we probably had more of an opportunity, and me personally, to get involved in that routing process. So Tom had laid out one of the court. Tom had routed 18 holes. I think it was 18 holes, but they wanted to build 36. And so we sort of adjusted his 18, and then we designed another 18. And then Tom came across and we sort of edited both. But so, unfortunately, the course that we essentially had routed never got really built. That was the lost one that you referred to. The one that Tom was predominantly, 90% of that is really Tom's routing, and then there's 10% that we'd been involved with. And and Ashley, my design partner, was heavily involved down at Barnbougle Dunes. He kind of project managed that whole process. And then I sort of did a similar thing at St Andrews Beach, and it was such a great opportunity to learn from one of the best that we will ever see, really, in Tom. And I've talked about this before in presentations and things, that it really, aside from kind of learning from him just some of what he saw in terms of design and routing, one of the biggest things that we took from it was how they operated, because prior to that point, pretty much every golf course in Australia, whether it was a redesign or a new build, the traditional way of approaching it was to do a detailed set of plans and to give them to a contractor, and then the contractor would build it. And, the architect might pop in once every week, maybe month. But a lot of the product was a result of the set of plans. And Tom approached it differently. Suddenly his staff essentially were building the work. And it was based on a concept, but then they were in the field, they were making improvements as they saw fit. And this was, for both Ashley and I, this was so different to the way everyone else worked, but it made so much sense. And within a very short space of time, we were convinced this is the right way to approach things. And if you think about it, it makes no sense to me now that why would you hand all your IP over to a contractor so that they can then go and work for another architect? Why wouldn't you work with your own staff who understand how you think, and where you can, with very simple instructions or a very simple plan, you can kind of explain, we want this green a little bit like the sixth at wherever, or the second, or, how we did that mound at whichever job it was, it's how we want that to work. And so it just made a lot of sense to us. So when we started OCM, that was very much in the forefront of our minds, was that we want to be a design and build company. And that's how we've set the company up. We own, it's in Australia, we're very much a turnkey sort of operation. We have 3 or 4 full-time shapers. We have a project manager. We have the 3 of us, and it's very much a collaborative effort. We don't pretend to have all the knowledge by any stretch. And so there's been projects here where we've actually, or at the moment down at Lonsdale, we're also doing the maintenance. But typically, though, everything from sort of that first concept sketch right through to grassing, really, we like to look after. In America, it's a bit different. It's not practical to take all your staff over to America, but we certainly, on the projects over there, still have one of our shapers, and we'll just work very closely with a large contractor.
I've heard you speak about the neoclassical golden age that we're now in, potentially, as a return to the arts and crafts movement. In essence, being much more a hands-on and selective opportunity in terms of boots on the ground, taking the appropriate time to get the projects right from a construction and finishing perspective, and I guess not trying to take too many projects on simultaneously. How important do you think it is to OCM to design and build your own work through the direct auspices of, amongst others, your partner Ashley Mead and obviously Jason McCarthy? And how does that approach translate into facilitating the delivery of the most optimal work?
No, it's we have worked on projects in the past where we have worked with a contractor, and that just further cemented our belief that it is not the way to go about getting the best results. So we will only take on projects in Australia that we can build ourselves. We're not interested in working another way. Occasionally the scale of a project will warrant another contractor being involved to do perhaps some of the heavy lifting, or things like irrigation installation. We're never going to profess to be experts at. But yeah, it's a for us, construction really is just a natural extension of the design process. So we, but by working in that way, I guess I've talked about it before, where there's sort of 2 camps. There's designers that are very plan focused, and then there's the sort of the guys that are more boots on the ground in the field. And I guess for me, if you're very plan focused, it's almost a belief that the plan is king, and that site visits are checking to ensure that the contractor is building it as per the plan. Whereas I guess going about it the way we do, by working off a concept, every time you visit, you're still looking at things and deciding, could this be better? You're always striving for it to be better. And if that means deviating from the plan, well, so be it. Maybe one bunker becomes 2, maybe you move the green, something's not working. And so I think that approach, you are always, at the end of the day, you're judged by what you leave on the ground, not by the set of plans. And so I think we're always striving to get the very best result from the bit of ground in question.
Do you think that maybe sometimes where a club or an organisation is involved as the client, the plan and the piece of paper gives them tangibility, gives them something to, rather than the great unknown of, well, this is just conceptual. Here, it'll look something like this. It may look like exactly like this. It may look completely different. But that, for want of a better word, that discordance, if you like, in terms of a conceptual idea. Some people have a difficulty of, well, it's probably the idea, hard, long, tough, that's a good golf course. So it's kind of probably, it's ingrained in people's heads maybe for 50 or 60 years of groupthink that this is the way things work. This is the way we've always done it.
Yeah. No. And look, early in our careers, it took a lot of convincing of this approach, I have to say. And in describing it the way I have, I don't want it to sound as though, the plans get thrown out the door and we just make it up as we go along. It's the holes end up being very... No, the holes do end up looking fairly similar. I mean, they're in the same, if it's essentially a new build or, a major renovation, like at Peninsula, for instance, or Peninsula Kingswood, the holes are all more or less where they were drawn in the master plan. But if you actually look through it hole by hole, there's differences on every hole. The shapes of the greens, the exact position of the green, the bunkers, and what have you. But the spirit of the design is very much intact. It's just in terms of the execution, some of the detailing, is best left in the field or to be sorted out in the field. And but amazingly, there's been a real shift, and I'm sure Tom doing work in Australia has helped, because it's very much how he operates. And so him being over here and doing 3 or 4 projects, it's how we've approached all of our projects. So now no one really questions it, which is surprising and refreshing. That
results.
So they kind of understand that, this is not like building a house or building a road, or, it's an organic process. And yes, we can still quote and we can still get quotes based on what we've done. And I think they take some comfort in the fact that because we are building it, if we decide to move a green 10 meters or make it bigger or make it smaller or add more bunkers, there's no cost implications for the client. If we have to take more time to do it, it's just part of the deal. We're not going to then, it'd be a bit self-serving if we decided to keep moving greens and then putting in a variation every time we move the green. Maybe move it back. No, go back the other way. We're not going to do that. So whenever we price a project, it's very much a fixed lump sum for anything to do with our work, all of our shaping, all of our design. So the only exposure that a club may have is that in terms of materials. So if suddenly a green went from 600 square meters to 1,000 square meters, well, there's a cost associated with that. But I think we're very good at project managing and keeping clubs, giving them, we'll provide monthly reports and what have you. And so if we're thinking about doing something like that, we actually have the opportunity to explain that to them and talk through it and walk through it with the committee before we're not just going to spring it upon them, do the work, and then say, oh, and by the way, it's going to cost a bit more. So I think, if you're good at that, at managing clients' expectations and project management, then I think that process can work quite well.
Yeah, I'd just like to take a look maybe briefly at the Victoria Restoration Project. Obviously, through various iterations of Mike Clayton Golf Design, OCCM and OCM now, you've been involved on consulting at the Victoria Golf Club for many years. I touched upon the early days of the Victoria renovation works with Mike Clayton in a previous episode. I was fortunate to play Vic and the completed course in January 20. I think at that stage you were probably had opened up maybe 4 or 5 months from completion. Obviously, to that point was a 25-year process of restoration, regeneration and revision. When we think about restoration in a Sandbelt context, we need look no further than Graham Grant's restorative efforts at Kingston Heath in the 1980s. Obviously, Graham focused on tree management and bunker restoration reopening, revitalisation and refinding. How important do you feel Graham's efforts were towards reimagining the aesthetics and playability of the Melbourne Sunbelt?
I think he was a huge part of it. And, I guess eventually it would have caught up. The whole restoration movement would have eventually found its way to Melbourne. But, I don't feel Graham gets the credit he should for the work he did at Kingston Heath. At the time he did, but then for whatever reason, he left the club, and his name's not talked about enough really. But he and the captain at the time, looked back at a lot of the old aerials and a lot of the old plans, and gave him an opportunity to. As you say, he removed a lot of vegetation. He brought back a lot of the bunkering. He rebuilt every tee on the golf course. People talk about freeform tees now, and we built a lot of freeform tees, and so does Tom and a few others. But I think you could look back to Graham's work at Kingston Heath, and he kind of created that look around Melbourne, really. Up until that point, tee complexes were just flat pads, peanut shapes. Whereas he suddenly had all of this beautiful movement in and around the teeing areas that was something, you'd only see on a green up until that point. And, it was a brilliant turf manager as well. He rebuilt a number of the greens there too. Yeah. So, and that really probably started the trend in Melbourne, or showed people what was possible in terms of, restoration and redesign work. So, that was a big part, I would say.
Yeah, with regard to particularly the green sites of Victoria, they were sown with a creeping bent grass called Pure Distinction. I can honestly say that I've never encountered better putting surfaces. What can you tell us about the last phase of improvements at Vic that were completed in early 2019?
So we actually used Pure Distinction down at Peninsula Kingswood. So that was the first. We used it at Royal Canberra, and then Peninsula Kingswood chose that grass based on a lot of the trial work and the results at Royal Canberra, and then Victoria chose it, having seen Peninsula Kingswood. It was a really interesting project. Victoria's greens were some of the oldest original greens on the sandbelt, so there were probably 12 greens. Without going through them in my head. 12 or 14 greens that were still the original profiles. So they hadn't been changed in 90 years. So, they for a long time had survived with sort of a mixture of poa and bentgrass greens. And, unfortunately, usually when the pure bentgrass greens around Melbourne are at their best, the poa is probably at its worst. And I think pressure had been mounting for a number of years that they were sort of the odd ones out. Everyone else pretty much around Melbourne had converted their greens to a pure bentgrass. So they made the decision to convert the greens, and that was, I guess that was the key part of the plan originally, was just the greens, focused on the greens. But then, given the disruption, other things came into play. The club needed a new irrigation system, and then we were able to also convince them of potentially redesigning a number of the greens. Some of the non-original greens, there was some fairway bunker work, some teeing areas were redone, vegetation work, some tree removal, adding some revegetation. So it became, while the hood's up, so to speak, there was an opportunity to add in some of these other works and make it an actually pretty comprehensive program. One of the things we did there a little differently was we had some very detailed surveying done of every green surface. So because they were sort of fiercely protective of these original green contours, the idea was to basically put them back as they were. So that was our starting point. So there, of the 12 or so original greens, probably half of them were put back exactly as they were. And then the other half were, there were some adjustments made to get surface water off the greens or to add a pin position, but 95% of the surface was as it was. We looked at, but following on from Richard Forsyth's work at Metropolitan in the 90s, when he took the putting surfaces right to the edge of the bunker. But that had almost become a bit of a Melbourne Sandbell look. He moved to Royal Melbourne and done the same thing there. Woodlands had copied that look. We did the same at Peninsula Kingswood. And now it's kind of synonymous with the Sandbell, I would say, that look. And it was all based on there was a line in a McKenzie report talking about how the greens at Metropolitan seemingly went to the edge of the bunkers. Whether they did, I find it hard to believe that they went right to the edge back in the 1920s, just because of, mowing practices, but maybe they did. But anyway, that was where the idea came from. And by the time you do that, by the time you expand greens to the edges of the bunkers, suddenly the greens are getting bigger, they're expanding at the front, they're expanding at the backs. And so there's slight adjustments that you need to do in order to, there's opportunities to add extra pins and what have you. So that became part of the process at Victoria. And we worked with a surveying company. We had one of our Bobcats retrofitted with some, as a dual grade laser. And it was an interesting process, because once they were surveyed, you could then do whatever you wanted to the surface. You could strip off, 6 or 8 inches. You could add sand back on and essentially get in the Bobcat and get those contours back within, our tolerance was 5 millimeters there, that in terms of sign off with the club. And I remember doing the 8th green and it was 1 millimeter. It was within 1 millimeter of the original green. It was like,
that's spectacular.
1 millimeter is like a couple of grains of sand. And it was like, how is this but it was interesting because that was a true restoration. And a lot of times people talk about restorations and it's, they're restoring the feel or the theme, but really they're making changes. And this was a case where you felt like you were checking your ego at the door. And it was like, if I was rebuilding this green and it was my design, there were things that I would probably do slightly differently, but that wasn't the point. The point was to put them back basically as they were. So you kind of had to let the machine take over. There was a pretty clever piece of design work I thought we did, where there were 3 greens there that had been quite controversial. They were severely pitched. So it's a green like the 6th there, for instance, the pitch on that green was probably 6% slope. And, in the 1920s, when the greens were running at 7 feet, that was fine. But in 2020, running at 12, it was problematic. But we were able to, by doing this survey, we were able to basically change the tilt of the surface of the green. So pivot around the middle of the green, but keep all the internal contours as they were. So the back of the green came down a foot, the front of the green came up a foot. Suddenly it went from 10% of the green being pinnable to 60% of the green being pinnable. It was still severe, but suddenly playable. And to the casual observer, to the member, it looks like the old green. It's got all of the internal contour, but the tilt has changed. And that worked incredibly well. And we did that on the 11th green, the 13th green, and the 6th green. And Jeff has been a member there since he was a kid. He cannot tell that those greens are any different. But all of a sudden, they've gone from being unplayable to playable.
Amazing.
So that was cool. And then there were 3 greens that weren't original that we completely redesigned in a style probably more befitting the original green. So it's a great example. I talk about it with other clubs that, any one of these changes on their own might be like a 2 or 3% change, but the cumulative effect of all these changes had a significant impact on the look and the feel of the golf course. It was amazing where it went from to where it is now, just by adding up all of these little changes across the golf course. So
that practice of surveying the greens prior to getting the scalpel out, when did that practice begin, if you like? When did it become technically possible to do that? And obviously it gives not only you guys comfort that you can revert back to what was there if there's an error or you do something that you're not happy with, but it also gives the client, I suppose, comfort that, this is how we're going to do it. We're just going to change the pitch, as you say. It's going to look exactly the same. We've taken our LiDAR or however you did your survey points. I'm just interested to know, when did that sort of approach begin in terms of, an appreciation, first of all, for what was there and a reverence? I suppose it sort of feeds into that restorative movement, I suppose.
It does, yeah. I mean, from a technical point of view, well, and even from you know, it's really been probably since the early 2000s, I would say, that, you know, the whole sort of restoration movement has kind of, you know, there's been a groundswell of committees and architects searching through old aerials and archives and photos, and the idea of, you know, there's so much reverence now for the Golden Age architects, and the idea of putting courses back the way they were. You know, they did a similar. We were at Wingfoot recently, walking around there and talking with Steve Rabideau, the superintendent, and they took a fairly similar approach to those greens. I mean, those greens had shrunken a lot, and they did a lot of survey work in terms of when Gill did the work there, getting the greens back out to where they were and retaining those contours. I mean, the Lido, Tom, the work that Tom's doing, and the two Brians and the guys at the Lido, I mean, that's really only been possible as a result of this sort of survey equipment, basically reimagining the original Lido course. I would say it's probably in the last 15 years that it's actually possible, that the surveying now is so good, whether it's via drone or via, you know, manually. I mean, the survey at Victoria, there was a survey point every 2 centimetres across an entire green surface. I mean, at Long Island, we're doing a renovation at Long Island, and there's a fantastic green there that was built by Vern Morcombe. Vern was the superintendent at Kingston Heath for 46 years, and his dad, Mick Morcombe, Mackenzie spoke very glowingly about. He sort of said he was the best greenkeeper he'd ever come across, and he had an amazing ability to create natural-looking shapes that were, you know, man-made. And Mick really built all of Mackenzie's work around Melbourne, with Vern as one of the, you know, essentially one of the first shapers, really. And each of them went on to have careers in golf course design. Both of them were fantastic at building greens and bunkers. And Vern did some work down at Long Island. He built a number of the greens, and he did some fantastic bunkering. And the third hole down there is one that we would hate to lose, but it's become unsafe. It's incredibly close to one of the boundaries. And so what we've talked about there is exactly what we did at Victoria. We want to survey that in such detail that we can basically pick the green and the bunkers up and move them 60 metres further down the hole. And it's a great challenge, you know, to do that. I think there's no reason why it won't work. And it'll be a slightly shorter hole, but we want to retain, you know, the spirit of Morcombe's work there. It was such a great, it's such a great path through. We don't want to lose that. And the technology we have today, you know, in the past, it was all done through photos or, you know, feel. And photos are tricky because they don't show what's going on in the third dimension. So, whereas it's on the short course at Kingston Heath at the moment that we're finishing off, I kind of liked the idea of one of the greens being a copy, basically, of the 10th green on the main course. It's one of my favourite holes. And there was a flat piece of ground, and for whatever reason, I just thought it suited the 10th. So we've built a replica of it, but we've done it more through, we haven't done a survey. So we've done it through eye and through taking levels and sending the guys out to the 10th and coming back and having another look and checking. And so that's been a fun process too. And it doesn't have to be exactly the same, but we've gone so far down the path of making it the same that it's like, well, now you better make sure it's, you know, you're going to look foolish if it's not really, really close. So we've sort of, the last couple of weeks, I've been pretty anal about, you know, some of the shapes and contours and things, but yeah.
No better man. Look, maybe if we just take a look at Bonnie Doon for a second. I had the pleasure of a number of rounds with a member there who's actually joining me over here in a week or two, a guy called Greg Hall, if he's listening. Hello, Greg. In January 2020. So I know you were the lead architect on the project, and that it was done over a number of years in an iterative sort of way. So I'm just wondering, first of all, if you can maybe let us know what drove Bonnie Doon to redevelop their golf course obviously on a great sand-based site in Sydney.
It was at that year. It was at that time. It was 2010 where there'd been a lot of redevelopment, of older established courses that really flown up in the rankings. And one of the captain or one of the committee members at the time was pretty well read, reasonably across what was happening elsewhere down in Melbourne. And I guess they'd had a proposal from their architect at the time, or their previous architect, to build a new driving range in front of the clubhouse, which would have happened to take up some of the best golfing land on the property. And he was aware of that. And he thought that seemed like a really flawed direction. The golf course itself had been there for many years, 60 or 70 years, but it was a bit of a hodgepodge. There was some new work that was done. There was old work. They had an area that the club owned that had been a landfill. And they thought there was an opportunity to potentially build some holes down there. So I guess they were at the crossroads. They weren't exactly happy with the advice they were getting. They saw that this was a fantastic piece of land. We'd done some work. So basically in Sydney, there's Bonnie Doon, East Lake, and the lakes, all basically touching borders, all in a row, all built on this amazing sandy ground. Bonnie Doon had been looked at years prior as the silica content in the sand was so high that a company wanted to buy the property to produce lenses for glasses, because it was 100 feet deep of just sand straight down. So it was a great golfing property. It had vegetation that was similar to the Sandbelt, it was called Eastern Sydney Banksia Scrub. Eastern Suburbs Banksia Scrub, ESBS. And it's very similar to the heathland down here. And so all of these things led to, well, maybe we should look at the market. They went out to the market and looked at a few different firms, and we eventually won the project. But it was such good land, and I think the course may not have even been ranked in the top 100 in Australia, which was a tragedy given how good the land was. Beautiful property.
Did completing the golf course renovation over a period of years present any specific challenges?
It did. Yeah, it did. It's not ideal. I mean, that's the way they felt comfortable doing it. I think at the time they didn't want to go into debt, so it was sort of done on as they could afford to do various sections of the course. So we did it over 4 or 5 stages, which pretty much took 8 years, I would say. The problem is with that method that by the time you get to the 8th year, the work you'd done in year 1, they had power coming into some of the greens. They'd also changed superintendents a few times, and so there'd been a few changes there. So it was, by the time we got to the end, it almost needed a 5th stage just to try and stitch a few of the sections together a little better, so it was just a little bit more cohesive. But they've done an exceptional job. Cameron, the superintendent, there's been fantastic. The course has never been better. He's doing a super job, and we continue to consult there and make sort of some of these refinements just to make sure they've got this sort of cohesive product. So, I mean, that's the downside to doing staged work over a number of years. That the ideal, obviously, is to shut a golf course and do all 18 in one hit, but very few can afford that luxury. So then you look at 9 and 9, and then you look at 6, 6 and 6, and then every step down is But they're at a point now where you wouldn't know, to be honest. If you went and played that course today, you'd have no idea that it was done. It had been done over a number of different stages. They've done a really good job of getting all the pieces to work.
I know you were inspired by many outside influences, as is often the way, I suppose, in terms of design, in terms of whole designs at Bonnie Doon. You might tell us about some of these influences. Particularly, I know that par 5 down by the driving range, there was some specific influences there, maybe in terms of Hoylake and a few other places.
Yeah, I think golf course designers can be great mimics. It's interesting, you sort of going all the way back to what we were talking about earlier, going and seeing these great courses. I would say one of the skills of a great architect is a good memory. good photographic memory, and you kind of remember the great holes, bits of them, that whether it's the green or particular features, and you kind of store them away in the memory bank. And when you see a new course or a new property, it's amazing. You're going through the mental Rolodex in your head and thinking through, what looks similar to this, or this looks a little bit like the first, Prestwick or whatever. And so at Bonnie Doon, the 14th hole is a par 5 that happened to be played alongside the land I was talking about before, where I said there was an old tip site. Basically, in our design, we decided to use that. So they had so much sand on site, we were able to mine the sand off a section of the property and cap that entire tip site with over 3 or 4 feet of sand, and then plus some to create movement as well. And I guess the idea of playing a hole with a driving range next to it, started thinking a little bit about Hoy Lake. And I played the British Amateur at Hoy Lake in 2000, when in the proper order, where the first hole's one of the most terrifying first holes in golf, the 90-degree dogleg around a berm which is out of bounds. It's a long par 4. But the idea of this sort of diagonal ridge running down the right of the par 5 kind of took shape. It was at an interesting time of the round. It's the 14th hole, so we felt like we could create a hole there where there was people are into their round enough where they may be tempted to kind of make the heroic carry over the ridge. It had some similarities to 14 at the old course at St Andrews as well, except it was a ridge instead of a fence. So the 14th there definitely reminded us a bit of those two holes. There's a par 4 on the back 9 where the green's kind of sitting down at a bit of a punch bowl, which reminded me a little bit of one of the holes at Royal Cinque Ports, the par 5. I think it's been a while now, but I want to say it's about the 3rd or the 4th hole, perhaps, at Cinque Ports. But and it's quite common, really. It's not just at Bonnie Doon. There's lots of holes, lots of courses that we've worked on where you get to a particular hole, and it's inspired by, I would say, a more famous version. At Peninsula Kingswood, there's a great short par 4 we built, the 8th on the North Course, which definitely has some similarities to the 10th West at Royal Melbourne, perhaps even 4 at Barnbougle Dune, the big dominant hazard on the corner, and kind of a similar aesthetic. So I think it's quite common for architects to talk in those terms. This green will be a little bit like the second at wherever, and that's where I think that communication and that close working relationship with your shapers helps, particularly when your shapers are interested in golf and understand the holes you're talking about.
Now, apropos Bonnie Doon, one recollection I have is the collection of short par 4s. And I guess given the legacy of short 4s throughout Australia, I'm wondering if you think that members and visitors alike feel somewhat maybe shortchanged if an Aussie course does not feature a few of these 3.5 par holes.
I think you should feel shortchanged if any golf course doesn't have a short par 4. I think it's such an important part of the experience. We love them because they don't prejudice against any sort of particular golfer. I mean, we were talking about it actually last night down at Long Island, and the most boring golf hole, I think, for most golfers is sort of the 440 or 50 yard par 4. It's like, every day it's generally the same club off the tee. For a good golfer, they're hitting a driver and a mid iron. For the average golfer, they can't get home in 2. But suddenly, if you're presented with a 300-yard short par 4 that's really well designed, the good golfer's got 4 or 5 clubs in their hand, which they wouldn't normally have. And they've really, the decision can be confusing. It's tantalizing knowing that you might be able to drive the green, but at the same time, there might be some sort of dominant hazard there you're trying to avoid. Is it a 4-iron? Is it a 3-wood, a rescue? What do I hit? And I could play those sorts of holes over and over again, and I think they're fantastic because the average golfer with 1 or 2 good swings can make a birdie or can make a par, and yet a tour player can be completely humbled and walk off with a double just through a poorly played shot or a poorly thought out shot. Bonnie Doon was unique in that there were 4 or 5 of these holes, but we didn't really see it as an issue, providing that they were all different. They needed to ask different questions. They needed to look different. They were bunkered differently, kind of shaped differently as well. And so it is unique in that sense that there's not just one or two. I mean, pretty much every project, hand on heart, that we will ever be involved with will always have at least one short par 4, usually more than one. But Bonnie Doon is unique in that there's 4 or 5. But
yeah, never deviate from that particular plan.
And a short par 3, I would say too. I would throw that in. I think
100%. Variety is the spice of the game.
Yep.
Just apropos the great 3.5 at the short par 4s, what do you feel characterizes a great short par 4?
I think there has to be a temptation to. I think generally you want to see the flag. Not always. There's a good one at LA Country Club where you don't, but I think usually you want to see that sort of tantalizing prospect of a flag dangling above a very large or very scary hazard. And I think I don't like them when they're too long. I kind of like them shorter, because I think you want to guilt the good player into going for it. You want to keep pushing those tees forward enough where they can't not want to have a go at it. I think there's a good line I read once about, the very best, most strategic short par 4s typically have a penal hazard involved. So I think usually there is there's a hazard that you don't want to be in that makes a par very difficult to recover from. And I think you want space. I think you want some width. You want that aggressive line or that option where you can play close to a hazard and get a reward. But I really like it when there's 40, 50, 60 yards away from that hazard where you can play conservatively, but you're just going to face a much more difficult second shot. I often talk about the 3rd at Kingston Heath, and I think that's such a brilliant bit of design work, because the land there gave them absolutely nothing to work with. It's dead flat, it's heavy, it's basically clay, there's a little bit of sand on top. And it's not the conventional way of setting up a slight dogleg. There's not a hazard on the inside corner. It's kind of interesting that it's a green that actually rewards, it sets up to favour play from the outside of the dogleg. But as a result, it's sort of counterintuitive. You stand on a tee and you want to take direct aim at the green, and you don't realise that actually if you take that line, it's the worst angle. You get down there and realise that you've got an incredibly difficult shot to the green. I don't know how much of that hole is by chance, by design, but it's one of my favourite short par 4s anywhere in the world.
It's a bloody great hole, so it is. I was wondering why I had a difficulty with my approach from the inside corner of the dogleg. You just answered that question.
Well, but they did I sat there and watched the World Cup. One of the advantages of living next door. And they all made the wrong decision. It was incredible. I mean, these guys are like some of the best players in the world. And they were all taking like a 2-iron or a driving iron, and they were hitting to the narrowest part of the fairway with the wrong club on the wrong line and finishing in these wicked positions. And it was like, what are you not seeing here? No one hit. I mean, it's kind of either, if you want to hit a driver, fair enough, try and drive it in the greenside bunker and, back yourself, you can get up and down. But otherwise, hit a 5-iron, go left, try and get the right angle. But they all, I would say 70% of the field were playing the wrong shot. It was really interesting.
Wow.
But it messes with your head because it doesn't set up like a traditional dogleg, I guess.
But as you say, it's one of those things with the short 4s that you'll try something and it works, then you'll go again with a little bit more risk, and then something goes wrong and you then go back the next day to the chicken out a little bit, and it's that oscillation of I've got it, oh no, I haven't got it, I've got it, I'm not. You're building confidence, and then it fails, and you go back to the start again. And we all know how brittle golfing confidence can be at times.
Yeah, absolutely.
Listen, maybe we can take a look at Geoff Ogilvy's return to Australia, and obviously he's the O in OCM. Geoff became a business partner of yours in 2010. Obviously a partner, someone in absentia until his move back from the USPGA Tour to Melbourne at the end of 2018. I'm assuming that with greater proximity comes greater responsibility and involvement on Jeff's side. And I can imagine, having had the pleasure of listening to him, and a big fan whenever he's on a pod or available on YouTube. From time to time, I can imagine that a cerebral character like Jeff can, probably be quite useful to have on the team.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Jeff moved back to Australia, I think, about 3 years ago. So, ironically, around that time we started to get more work in America. So, but yeah, no, he's very much an important part of the team, and we just finished a trip to America about a month ago. So it was a good opportunity for him to see. He hadn't, at that stage, I don't think he'd seen the project we were working on down in the southeast of the States, and we kind of went on a bit of a client visit, and so it was a good opportunity for him to get involved in those. I mean, like I say before, I mean, some of the ideas we have on various projects can come from anywhere. Sometimes it might be something that Jeff was talking about, other times Ashley, other times myself, and then we kind of typically, throw ideas around and until we find the right, path, I guess. But no, Jeff's been great, and really more so now that he's actually here, and I guess his playing days are, well, they're not over, but he's certainly, I think, as he's transitioning from full-time player to part-time player and getting a bit more involved with the design, it's been great for us. Yeah.
Oh, for sure. And look, you alluded to your involvement with Peninsula Kingswood. Ross Flanagan from the My Love of Golf podcast is a mutual friend of ours, and indeed a fellow member of yours at Peninsula Kingswood. I recall Ross telling me about an occasion where he spied you out on the golf course one dewy morning, drawing on the grass with your work boots. The things we do for the love of golf. Yeah. I think you were nearing completion of the project, and maybe you were working through a couple of edits. But he spied you early in the morning, minding your own business. But he was certainly interested to see what you were doing. You might give the listeners who perhaps don't already know about the PK story a brief intro to the amalgamation that led to OCM's design brief and onwards to the construction of both the North and South courses that are now recognised among the finest that Melbourne Sandbelt has to offer.
Yeah, so it was. So I joined. Yeah, I joined there when I was 15, and I had been a member there for, well, incidentally, but before we started the work, I had joined Kingston Heath, and I couldn't justify being the member of two courses, so I resigned my membership from Peninsula, and then a year later we were engaged to start some work. So I've since they asked me back once we completed the work, so I'm a member again, but. Yeah, it was kind of a funny segue. I mean, Peninsula Kingswood, some of the best golfing land really in the country, possibly second only to Royal Melbourne in terms of the kind of golfing terrain. I tell a story. Peninsula is one of the few courses, one of the only courses around Melbourne that wasn't influenced at all by Mackenzie, Russell, or the Malcolms. And when Mackenzie was here in 1926 and he was working around the Sandbelt, he also visited Flinders. So he would have driven within 2 or 3 kilometres of Peninsula. And I kind of think that if he'd known what was just, over the other side of the road, it would have burned him up to think that he missed an opportunity to work on that site. I can only assume he had no idea, or he wasn't invited, or whatever. But they were in the process of building the courses at that time. So obviously some work had been done there over the years prior. They probably were never financially in a position to go through a major renovation, but then they started talks with Kingswood Golf Club about a possible merger, and Peninsula were the perfect merger partner because they were very under-golfed 36-hole facility. It's a huge property, 450 acres, and it's brilliant golfing terrain. It's generally fairly sandy, brilliant vegetation, and some really good undulation and space, which very few of the sandbelt clubs have. And I had a good relationship with the then president, and sort of started having kind of regular coffees with him, I guess, about, the courses and, what if the merger happened, what would you do? And at that stage, they started thinking about, well, we need a new irrigation system, and maybe at the same time we'd do a few other things. And then the merger happened, and that just grew. And then it was the greens had been a problem for many years, and there was a mixture of, there were some new greens, some old greens, and they weren't great in terms of their condition. There was a bit of a mixture of styles, certainly nothing approaching the quality of of Royal Melbourne and Kingston Heath. And I guess the more we talked, the more we said, kind of landed upon that should be the goal. You need something comparable with the best of the sandbelt. And my sort of loose goal to them was that, because they started talking about rankings and things like that. And it's like, well, when people come to Melbourne, overseas guests, if they've got a day or two, they'll play Royal Melbourne and Kingston Heath. And if they've got an extra day, they'll go to Victoria and Metropolitan, and then they leave. And those four clubs typically stand out from the rest of the sandbelt. There's Royal Melbourne, then a gap, then comes Kingston Heath, Victoria and Metropolitan, and then there's a big gap, and then there's everyone else. I said, you need to turn 4 into 5. You need to be part of the conversation. I said, if you're part of the conversation, everything else will take care of itself. Don't worry too much about specific rankings. But suddenly, if you're in that mix, well, then that means you're in the world top 100 kind of conversation as well. You're thereabouts. So that was in 2014. And the board at the time were brilliant. Peter Sweeney, the president, was just fantastic. He only ever questioned one thing that we did, and he sort of likes to talk about it. I had a mound on the Fourth South that we built. It was kind of meant to be a little bit like the fourth at the old course at St Andrews. It was a long par 4, and I kind of liked how that mound can kind of bump a poor shot away from the target, or maybe shoulder it in towards the pin, a well-controlled shot. And he just thought it looked a bit high, so we took a foot off it, and that was it. That was the only criticism he had in a 4-year project. But yeah, so it started out with irrigation, then the greens became a subject of conversation, mainly from a maintenance point of view, making a consistently firm, fast green. Then that expanded into bunker style, the design of the greens, the vegetation, and yeah, they were an amazing client and remain to this day. We still work there a lot. We do regular audits. We're constantly trying to improve the course. We've just started some work there again for probably about 2 months. We're doing some little bit of sort of minor works, not wholesale works, but they've got the exact right approach where they're just constantly, they're going quite well at the moment, and they just want to keep pouring that effort and the funds into the golf course and making it better and better and better. And I truly believe, they'll end up in the world top 100. I think one of the courses, or possibly both of the courses, will get in the world top 100. So we're very proud of the work there. And for me personally, it means a lot, because I was I am a member there, for 30 years.
Yeah, I can imagine taking on a job and a role like that at a club that you're so closely associated with possibly represents the ultimate representation of tall poppy syndrome. Someone well reckons that if you're not annoying 20% of the membership as a course designer, then frankly, you're not doing your job properly. Would you agree with Mike's assertion?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think whenever I do a members presentation, I think the problem some people have is thinking that they convince 100% of the audience that, that they're right. You're never going to be able to do that. But yeah, I think if you can convince 80%, you're doing very well. So you're never going to please everyone. But certainly the project there was different. It was not, it's different when you're working with people that or working for people that and members that, you've spent so much time with over the years. And it was unique that they were comfortable with that too, because some clubs have, they don't like it when a member potentially is working there. I've been very fortunate both there and Kingston Heath. They're very comfortable with me as their consultant. But yeah, it goes beyond. It's not just a job or a project. You really, and it's not just a financial aspect or profile. It's you're invested in that for 4 or 5 years. So I'd hate to think how many hours we sort of spent down there getting the project right, or getting the design right. So.
Yeah, well, I believe I haven't had the pleasure yet. I do have an invite. Mr. Flanagan has invited me the next time I get down there, and I will certainly be availing of that particular invite. But I see that Melbourne has recently been announced as host city for the President's Cup in 28 and 40. No venue has yet been confirmed as yet. I'm just wondering, is there any truth to the rumour that the PGA Tour representatives may have been assessing PK recently with a view to considering it as a possible venue for 28 or for 2040?
They were out assessing 3 courses. So, okay. Royal Melbourne, Kingston Heath and PK. They visited. So
Fantastic.
We'll see.
That's good. Well, thank you for confirming that. I had heard there was a rumor on the ground that might have been taking place. In addition to obviously that particular rumor, something that is not a rumor. Obviously, Peninsula Kingswood was in fact used as one of the venues for the Sandbelt Invitational in December 2021. In seeing the professionals, and I assume you were there on the day that they swung through Frankston and PK. In seeing the professionals play PK during the event, has that led to any design or setup changes with a view to the 2022 version and beyond?
No, I mean, one of the things we've looked at there, there's some great opportunities for a composite course. So that even though it's pretty expansive property, both the north and the south courses are sort of limited in length to, let's call it 7,000 yards. And it depends on the tournament. I mean, if it were an Australian Open, like a men's and women's Australian Open were to be held there, it's probably long enough. I mean, you could always knock 1 or 2 of the par 5s down to 4s. 7,000 yards, 7,100 yards for that sort of event is fine, and for a women's event, it's fine. There's a lot of space to move tees around. It's interesting. The more you travel, you realise that as much as we hold up the Sandbelt as being, this pinnacle of design, they're actually very short courses, really. And we've seen it. Unfortunately, we've seen it at places like Royal Melbourne, where it almost becomes a bit of a wedge fest in the elite, sort of when there's been like a President's Cup or what have you, unless the weather kind of is favourable in the sense that the weather's bad, windy and rainy. And I mean, the length of courses they play now in the US Tour it's crazy. I mean, Medina, where we're working, I mean that's 7,650 yards. I mean, it's almost 7,000 meters. And they still shoot, Justin Thomas shot 24 under. It's like it's 700 meters longer than, and it's pretty much week to week. They're usually 7,500 yards. So it depends. So at PK, it depends on the tournament. So if there were, let's just say, Jay Monahan, 2 days ago announced there's going to be these 8 tournaments at the end of the year. Let's say he said, okay, there's going to be one in Australia, one at the Peninsula Kingswood. You would play one of the composite courses. So, and we've come up with, one that we really like, and there's probably, there's quite a few possible ones, but one of the composites that I did was about probably 7,400 yards and a par 70. So, and it kind of picks up the best parts of the property and also gives you a lot of space for tournament build out and, spectators and all the rest of it. So I think that is an advantage of that site, is that there is some opportunities to have a composite that can be tailored to the tournament, I guess. So.
Yeah, your mention of Medina brings us nicely into the Shady Oaks project. So Shady Oaks is located in Fort Worth in Texas, and it's of course synonymous with the 9-time major champion Ben Hogan. The it depends on whether you count that other one. I am aware of that other one, but for more information on that, Connor T. Lewis on the golf history podcast has a whole one about that. So if people are interested, I'll put a link on the show notes. Thanks for creating more work for me, Mike. Sound. Obviously, the initial development at Shady Oaks was on the Little Nine, which progressed seamlessly onto the redevelopment of the main course in 2019. I understand you've recently been overseeing some final flourishes at Shady Oaks. If memory serves, I seem to remember somewhat non-traditional US mowing lines were rolled out in Shady Oaks. A double green, dramatic strategic bunkering were also suggestions that the membership embraced. How have the development works at Shady Oaks been welcomed by the club?
They've been, it's gone remarkably well. So they, Shady it is a fantastic club. It's surprisingly undulating, the land there. It's quite dramatic, actually. There was a couple of sort of old creek lines, or barrancas, I guess they'd call them in California, that had been filled over. Trees had sort of encroached in a few places, but a wonderful club, wonderful potential. But I guess the golf course, there wasn't a lot of thought-provoking sort of decisions to be made. The fairways were pretty narrow. I think that there was only about 24 or 25 acres of short grass, fairway grass. That classic sort of US parkland sort of mowing practices of rough around the greens and narrow fairways with bunkers in the rough. And we pitched on that project back in about 2015. And we suggested that perhaps the first project should be the Little Nine, which was where it's kind of famous because it's where Hogan would practice. So Ben Hogan, the course was founded in 1958, so by Marvin Leonard, who also started Colonial Country Club, and he was a bit of a father figure to Mr. Hogan. And when a few members convinced him to build Shady Oaks because of the success of Colonial, Ben sort of went from Colonial and went across to Shady. So the Little Nine we still kind of hold it up as, it was one of our favorite little projects. It was a 10-acre space, and it was a pretty rudimentary sort of 9 pretty simple greens and pretty simple tees. And we turned it into something where you had the ability we rebunkered it, greens like you would see on a main golf course, on a proper golf course, proper green complexes, whereas previously they were just kind of small little round circles. And, golfers have the ability of playing it as 9 formal holes or playing it as freeform golf. So we built some bunkers that are kind of in between holes that if you play it as 9 par 3s, that they make no sense. But suddenly if you play it as freeform golf, where the winner of the hole decides to play to whichever green they want, these bunkers suddenly come into play because they're kind of the drive bunkers for playing par 4s. And on top of that, it's kind of the greatest practice facility you can imagine. You can hit every shot from a 2-foot putt through to a 300-yard drive. So that was kind of the start of our involvement there, and then that built towards doing a full renovation starting in 2019. We started in about July 2019, and it went through to pretty much to COVID. So we're pretty fortunate. Most everything was finished, and then I worked with the superintendent, Brent, and their crew on the finishing touches via Zoom, via using Photoshop to mark up photos, sort of this back and forth, this daily back and forth for about 2 months, which was remarkable, really. And it was amazing when I got back there to some of the areas that I hadn't seen finished. It had worked so well. And it kind of proved to me that there are other ways of working. In the past, I would have dismissed that, there's no way I can finish this without being there. But we were able to, just through this constant iterative process of photo change, phone call, Zoom call, FaceTime, it was unbelievable. And then it opened to great success. They really embraced. We started mowing the golf course out to the way we would like to see it before we started work, and the membership they loved it. They loved this sort of short grass linkages from greens to tees, more fine turf around the greens, where suddenly they found themselves being able to putt or chip instead of just kind of gouging it out of the rough. And then it was just such lovely people and just a wonderful project to be involved with. It was such an enjoyable process. And then the results, I think, sort of speak for themselves. It's received some very favourable reviews, and and I think in no small way that went a long way to helping us secure the project at Medina. We actually were chatting with Medina right through the COVID crisis, and so we weren't able to get there, and we're very fortunate that Shady Oaks was just getting ready to open, and we were able to sort of virtually take them on a tour around the course. So they actually traveled to Shady Oaks, and then we had a Zoom call before they walked around the course, had a Zoom call after, sent through information and sort of explained how we changed each hole. And I think that they were really impressed with the work there, and I think that was a big part of what eventually led us to winning the project there.
Yeah, I would suspect that you're not the only business person to come to the conclusion that work practices can change due to pandemics, and actually you may find new alternate and perhaps equally as good ways to divvy up your time to clients. I'm interested to know, though, how you go about pitching for business remotely during a pandemic. And obviously I'm speaking particularly and specifically in relation to the Medina 3 gig.
It was a fascinating process, because we hadn't spent really much time there at all. Jeff had played a tournament there. I was very fortunate. I'm good friends with Andy Johnson, who the Fried Egg, who lives in Chicago, and he very kindly went out to the club, and we spoke on the phone, and he took photographs and did drone footage of the entire golf course, but specifically on the areas that we're really interested in. The club had an incredible archive of old photos, old plans. We had topographic information. And so we just immersed ourselves in it. And Ashley and I spent countless days in the office just pouring through this information and doing a drone flyover of the hole and looking at the topography and looking at the plans. And we really knew that property incredibly well, having not really walked the course, in detail, and put together a pitch. And the club really liked kind of the theme and the vibe of what we were talking about. We're able to come up with a lot of ideas for the golf course that are still part of our plan now. And it was very satisfying when we got there, when we finally got back there in the height of the pandemic last year, in about June, I would say. We got government permission to leave the country, which was a big deal. And we spent about 2 months in America, and it was the first time we got back to Shady Oaks. We sort of visited with a few clients and potential clients, and we spent about 4 weeks at Medina. And I think what was really satisfying was walking the course. Nothing felt different. It was exactly as, all the areas that we hadn't spent a lot of time looking at were exactly as we thought they would be. Even some of we first came up with the idea of the rerouting of the last 6 holes back here in Australia, not over there. And that worked, after a couple of days, just getting our head around a few things, it worked just as well on the ground as we hoped it would. So, that was, it was interesting. It was completely different, but to how we would typically work.
Needless to say, congratulations. It's very impressive.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, no, thank you.
What I'm interested to know, when are you hoping to start, and how long will that project take?
So we're hoping to start in the end of the golf season this year, so sort of October, November. And then that'll be more geared around sort of, tree removal and some of the kind of the preliminary works rather than shaping. But then as soon as the snow melts next year, it'll be all full steam ahead in terms of shaping. So it'll be all 23 shaping and grassing, maybe a little bit of early 24, and then at this stage, kind of a soft opening in summer 24, so June, July 24.
Yeah.
And then the President's Cup's in 26. So.
Yeah, you guys have been very busy boys of late. Obviously, Sandringham Links was something else that you've worked on down in the Melbourne area. Royal Melbourne have held the operating lease at Sandringham Golf Links in Cheltenham since 2010. Now known as Sandy Links, the course is immediately sandwiched between Victoria Golf Club on one side and Royal Melbourne's paddocks on the other, in addition to moonlighting as a car park during major tournaments such as the President's Cup. I understand that OCM has spent some significant time over the last few years remodelling Sandy Links, somewhat more in the image of its bigger siblings. How did your involvement in the Sandy Links redevelopment evolve and come to be?
Yeah, we our initial contact there was actually through, there was a company that kind of a project management firm that had been scouting sites for this sort of home of golf for Golf Australia, PGA and what have you. And we had looked at a couple of different sites with them. And then the conversation, I think we may have even suggested it, that, Sandringham would be the ideal location because it's right in the heart of the Sandbelt. It made a lot of sense geographically. And then one thing led to another, and suddenly Sandy became an option for this sort of, it was to fit a few different purposes. There was an opportunity to upgrade the course, but it was also geared around this sort of the home of Golf Australia, the PGA Tour, and a sort of a practice facility for their elite golfers, as well as, upgrading a public facility. So it was interesting. It wasn't a particularly long course before, but with a lot of these other works, it meant they were going to lose 2 holes. So then the question turned to, well, what sort of design should we look at? And we threw up a few different options. One was for a limited number of holes that were full length, but there was a general consensus that they wanted sort of the traditional number of holes, which meant that it was going to be a much shorter golf course. So we were going to have to split a couple of the par 5s. But, the more we talked through it and thought about it, and it gets back to our comments before that, short par 4s are some of the greatest holes in the world. Melbourne is renowned for the great short par 4s and par 3s. We didn't necessarily see it as an impediment, particularly with the whole, the fact that this was going to be the home of Golf Australia, and a lot of their work lately has been about breaking down the barriers of golf and bringing more people into golf, and more women and more families. And, so a shorter golf course kind of ties in nicely with that, making it as an entry into the game. And so then we, chatting with Richard Forsyth, who is the superintendent at Royal Melbourne, I kind of said to him, look, in some ways, shouldn't our goal here be to create a publicly accessible sandbelt experience? So what if, if these were greens and bunkering that was consistent with what you see next door at Royal Melbourne or over the road at Victoria? I said, part of that is the maintenance. What are the chances that we could use the same grass that you've got at Royal Melbourne, the Sutton's mix, on the greens? And he kind of didn't really think too hard about it, and said, yeah, I think we should be able to do that. And I think he spoke to a couple of people, and all of a sudden that was an opportunity. So there's only 2 courses in Australia that use that bentgrass mix, and it's Royal Melbourne and Sandy. And so we use the same grassing there on the greens, and all the fescue surrounds. A lot of short par 4s and short par 3s, a lot of emphasis on the ground game, a lot of width. So it really has become, and it's only 4,600 meters long. So it's only a bit over 5,000 yards. So it's not long. but it gives the public an opportunity to play the sort of, greens and approach shots and the sort of chips and putts around greens that you would expect, anywhere on the sandbelt.
So over the past few years, there's been a growing trend towards the development of short courses to complement golf offerings at both resorts and golf clubs alike. So it picks up on that motif that you're speaking about a bit, Sandy, in terms of making it a bit shorter and a bit more playable, shall we say, for everybody. What advantages do you feel accrue to venues and golf clubs investing in complementary offerings such as short courses?
I guess at Kingston Heath, to your first point, I think we've found a lot of people that are getting into the game, particularly we've found with women, find the prospect of very daunting of just turning up on the first tee as their introduction to golf. And certainly one of the benefits of the short course at Kingston Heath that we've been working on is this idea of that it's a much friendlier introduction into the game for kids, for families, for women. It's also an opportunity to extend the golfing life of some of the older golfers that find, the main course just a bit too challenging. I think with Sandy, it's funny, like, if you think about the golfing landscape, I think there's, for me, there's too many of the same sorts of golf courses. It's amazing how many, the golf courses that are fairly similar length, fairly similar difficulty, similar par. If you're in charge of golf, if you were starting from scratch and you said, okay, we're going to create 100 golf courses, you of course would there'd be 10 championship golf courses capable of hosting a tournament, and there'd be 50 sort of member-friendly golf courses. But there would be 10 kids' golf courses. There'd be golf courses that were 3,000 yards long. There'd be short courses. There'd be 9-hole courses. There'd be a much broader spectrum of golf courses than what we have today.
Proper golf, Mike. There's a rule book there, and that's what it should be. It's proper golf.
Well, and that's been one of the challenges in the last few years, is breaking down the preconceptions of what golf is. I think Australia is worse than many other places around the world. In the UK, the idea, Prestwick was a 12-hole golf course. There's plenty of quirks on a lot of the Great Links courses, and as there are on some of the older courses in the States. But I think in Australia, for a long time, our version of golf was very sort of homogenized, and anything that strayed too far from convention was poo-pooed. I think we're slowly getting there. People are starting to understand that golf doesn't have to be par 72 with 4 par 3s and 4 par 5s and a certain length, and has to be this and it has to be that. It's just taken a while to get there, but I think we're starting to get there now.
Yeah, no, and thanks for that. I mean, apropos your mention of the short course in Kingston Heath, I saw some early digital renderings of the project courtesy of Harris Kalinka, and I have to say it looks really cool. The quality of the Harris Kalinka work is truly phenomenal. I know you've used them on a few other projects as well. What benefits do you feel resources like the one that Harris Kalinka brings to projects bring to bear during pitching of master planning discussions, and even just an opportunity for members and staff members and stakeholders just in general to visualize what things are going to actually look like? Most people can't really interpret a plan, to be honest. They can look at a two-dimensional plan, but I'm not sure in their head they can imagine what that looks like in the third dimension. So we have, for many years, we'll often do photo simulations, or I might do a sketch to show people what something might look like in the golfer's eye. This just takes that, 10 steps further. And it was interesting with Kingston Heath. I mean, we had a lot of support with the memberships for that project. We'd done a lot of work on plans and, member presentations, but it was amazing how powerful that particular video that you're talking about was, because it didn't matter how much you talked about it. I'm not sure the members could really understand what was possible.
And then suddenly that video came out and they were just like, oh my God, it looks like a golf course. Like, I didn't realize there was that much space, or I didn't realize that, that you could do that. I mean, we had people, it was almost viral, that thing. I mean, within half an hour of that being posted, the guys at Medina were texting saying, we got to get one of these. It was like half an hour. Yeah. It was half an hour, and but it shows how powerful it is. And I just think, a lot of just the average person just can't necessarily interpret what a plan is going to look like in their mind. So it's very helpful, whether it's a committee person or a member, or to be honest, even sometimes for a contractor, to be able to see something, to see a plan in 3 dimensions is incredibly helpful.
Yeah, the lead-on project, if you like, and certainly something that I saw a couple of months ago. You posted some drone footage of the Tepetonka site in Minnesota, located, I think, about 2 hours south of the twin cities of Minnesota and St. Paul. What can you tell us about your initial visits? What type of sites your wanderings have uncovered now that the snow has melted? And what sort of course should we expect OCM to deliver?
But it's strange. It's very similar to the Cups country on the Mornington Peninsula. It's amazingly, there are moments there walking around where you would swear you're at St Andrews Beach. It's not sand. That's the interesting thing. So it's all glacial.
What is it?
It's soil. Like it's there's clay underneath, and there's a good cap of soil. So it's nice land, but you can't believe it's not sand. Like, looking at they're dunes. They're proper. It's a dunal sort of countryside, and cutting through a third of the property is this fantastic creek with bluffs either side. So very steep ravine, very dramatic. So it's a great property. We'd looked at a couple of routings prior to going over there, and then we made a visit there during winter. It was very cold. I think it was just after snow melted. It was April, I would say. We spent about a week on site. And during that, we kind of completed, we ended up changing the routing quite a bit from some of the initial routings we'd done from home, but it ended up in a really good spot. It really, it's a lovely property. We're very pleased with the routing. And then Ashley and I were there again recently, about a month ago, and then we've got another visit in July. So we're hopeful that starts around the same time as Medina. Sort of later this year.
Okay, and obviously you have the winter weather to deal with there as well. So the construction project is likely to be abridged while the snow falls and thaws.
Yeah, they seem to kind of. It's quite common. They do a bit of the heavy lifting just before the snow comes in, and then so that when the snow melts, we're straight into shaping, basically. But I mean, that very much like St Andrews Beach, there's very little dirt to move. I mean, all the green sites are pretty much just sitting there. The tees are, you could cut the grass out now, and you basically have the teeing sites. There's a handful of areas where we're talking about moving dirt, but really not much at all. So it'll be that fairly classic kind of linksy remote destination golf sort of aesthetic, talking about a lot of native grass and kind of fescues, I guess, in the roughs. Pretty generous fairways, a lot of short grass. It's a fantastic golf course, and quite different to anything else in Minnesota, which is good. So.
Yeah, I recently heard your friend Andrew Johnson on the Fried Egg, who alluded, I think, to another OCM project in the USA. Certainly, I got the impression that the project was in addition to the Tepetonka project. What, if anything, can you tell us about this additional particular piece of industry gossip, if I haven't picked that up wrong? Feel free to tell me to mind my own business, but, hey.
I don't know what he could possibly be talking about.
You don't? The smile would tend to suggest otherwise.
No, we're working on a project at the moment in the southeast of the state. So fantastic. We visited the site in July last year. So on that visit, it's an incredible property, 2,000 acres of sand, some beautiful vegetation, pine trees, and sort of some low scrub that is reminiscent of, I guess, the sandbelt at the home and the heathland. terrific client. We've got a great team, and we have cleared. We've basically finished the routing, and we've sort of cleared and are shaping at the moment on kind of half a dozen holes, and kind of clearing ahead as well. So that's about as much as I can tell you about. But it's there. Yeah, we're definitely working on another project there, and at some point in the future they'll divulge more details. But it's a wonderful project. So
that's great. We look forward to hearing more about that in due course. And thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing that with us. No problem. Listen, just new builds are obviously a little thin on the ground here in Europe, and given that OCM generally appear to favour only having 2 large projects on the go simultaneously, I suspect that you probably have enough in your collective plates just at this very moment. However, I'm interested to see and to understand if you might perhaps have any interest in jumping on an Irish or a UK project if the right opportunity were to materialise.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It just, for whatever reason, we just have never, we just haven't had a lot of contact, I guess, from the UK. But, some of our favourite golf courses are in, England, Scotland, Ireland, Wales, the continent. We've all travelled there quite a lot. Jeff played the tour there for 3 or 4 years. I've travelled there 5 or 6 times. Ashley as well has been there a couple of times. So no, we would love the opportunity to work in the cradle of golf, so to speak. But it's just most of the work we've done to date has been Australia, a bit in Asia and America.
You alluded to your sketching earlier on, and I'd like to so I'm sure many of our listeners will be aware of your particular artistic bent, and that you're responsible for some of the most unique contemporary course guides and renderings that I have yet had the pleasure to encounter. There's something very Tom Simpson-esque about your drawing style. I hope you don't mind me saying that. That's one of the highest compliments I can make. I mean, I
absolutely,
I struggle to do stick man, Michael. So, so I'm assuming that the ability to draw can be quite a useful skill when in the midst of a roughing in, shaping, and final editing.
For sure, yeah. So my dad was or is he was an art teacher and my mum was actually too for 40 years. And Dad was he's a good artist. He doesn't draw or paint so much anymore. And so from an early age, I was interested in art and art history particularly. And so I dabbled, and Dad, I think, taught a lot of the skills, whether it was subconscious or consciously, when I was a teenager. And so I was decent at drawing, but when I got into golf course design, suddenly there was a reason to draw, and I kind of quickly realised that it was something that not that many people could do, and it's quite helpful. People could do an aerial, line work, doodle of a green and a bunker or whatever, but not many people could actually do a view of the green as though you were standing on the fairway, and this is what I'm kind of thinking the green would kick up, and it would do this and it would do that. And it was amazing how helpful I realized it was, to whether it was to convey it to a committee person, or, to be honest, quite often with one of the guys working in the field, one of the shapers, because they were so used to just seeing things in plan version, to be able to show them something and they could suddenly understand what you meant, because you could see it in the third dimension, because it was this sort of real life sketch. And so I think that convinced me to, spend a bit more time on my artwork. And then I guess in terms of the course guides, after we were involved at Barnbougle Dunes, the owner there, Richard, was keen on a course guide, and I think it was suggested that I could do one of those, and I was like, okay, I probably can. But I had done course guides just for myself in the past, and so then I did a course guide for Barnbougle Dunes, and then, not really advertising it, people saw that and then said, oh, I wouldn't mind one of those. And so then almost it became, the clubs where we worked typically wanted one of my course guides, and I sort of progressed from pen and pencil to watercolor. I really like painting in watercolor, and then it kind of went from there. And then I've done some big course plans and sort of renderings, if you like, of full course layout. I did one for the north and one for the south of Peninsula, and I did one for the old Kingswood site and Lake Karrinyup I've done, and Royal Queensland, and a few others. So yeah, I've ended up doing quite a lot. I do enjoy it still. I like to do one or two things each year, but it's just finding the time more than anything. I don't have that much time to do it now, but it still is very helpful. I just did I did these actually the other day for the mystery client we were talking about. But just it's helpful just being able to do some sketches of for the ownership of like, well, this is how we see the whole looking, and these are the characteristics of the whole. Where I guess not many people can do that. So it's a helpful skill, and so I enjoy doing it. I think it complements the work we do as designers. And when time allows, I still enjoy doing, whether it's just a worked up piece, or whether it's a course guide, or whether it's a rendering. Yeah. I will certainly take the time to compliment any day of the week. So.
Not a problem. Well, it's warranted and earned. Certainly, when counterpointed with my limited, and limited is actually been far too good to me. My limited arts. Listen, I think you probably answered this question in terms of your last answer, but I'm assuming that golf renderings, which obviously is your alter ego as an artist, I'm assuming golf renderings commissions are available only to OCM customers.
It's kind of gone that way, yeah, and it wasn't deliberate, but it gets a bit awkward now. I've had a few inquiries from clubs recently where another architect has done the work or is doing the work, and they're sort of asking whether I could do some renderings of holes, but it's sort of a bit awkward because I've got a fairly distinctive style, and then it sort of doesn't work so well. So yeah, so in the end, I mean, I have done some pieces that, I've done some paintings of Pine Valley or whatever, and I mean, people can buy them if they want, but it seems to be going that way where I'm typically doing more work that's on the back of work we've done as designers, where we've completed a project and then the club have said, "Oh, we'd really like at Lonsdale, we finished that project," and then they were aware of the course guides, and so they wanted a course guide done. Or Victoria was the same, Peninsula. So it is not by design, but it's kind of ended up going down that path, I would say.
Gotcha. Listen, we're into the the concluding section.
Maybe it's cunning though. So if you really want a course guide, you've got to hire us as the designers to do the work.
Yeah.
And then you can get a course guide.
that particular light bulb just went on about 2 or 3 minutes ago. Demand management, my friend. Demand management.
Yeah.
As I said, we're getting into the concluding section, and I ask my guests the same 2 concluding questions. Obviously, as a very well traveled gentleman, I'm sure. However, I'm sure you have a few locations left to see. I'm interested to see where the top 5 courses on your bucket list are. These can be repeat or debut plays. If 5 isn't enough, there's as much leeway as you need. So, what's on your bucket list?
To play or to see?
Well, either or. You can interpret the question however you wish.
Okay. I've not seen much of the continent, so it's a big miss. I would love to get to France and Holland and see, a lot of Simpsons work there, and I haven't seen it. So I know that's not a specific course, but that's an area that I haven't seen. I haven't been to Dornoch, which is a tragedy. I've seen a lot of the UK, and I've seen most of the Great Golf in Ireland. A lot of the States I've been fortunate enough to see. I would love to play Augusta. It would be it's funny, the first time I think golf architecture junkies can get a bit cynical about Augusta at times and talk about, how it's been ruined, or, this has happened and that's happened. But still, I was blown away the first time I went to Augusta. I thought it was incredible. And it just looked like it looked so much fun. off the members' tees. So much space. I don't think people realise how much width there is there. There's more width in Royal Melbourne, and it would be a dream come true to play Augusta. A couple of courses in Long Island that I haven't been to that I'd like to see: Fisher's Island, Maidstone, the Continent. I would say that Seminole. I haven't been to Seminole. I know it's not exactly 5 courses. I've sort of thrown a few in there.
That's all right. No, I mean, you were given enough rope to hang yourself there. So
no, but the continent's the real miss. I really would like to spend a couple of weeks working through some of France and Holland.
Yeah. Well, I mean, somebody said to me recently that arguably you can draw a line south to the south of Paris predominantly, and most of the good golf in Europe is north of that.
Yeah.
The final question is with regard to book recommendations. For listeners looking to augment their golf library, you might recommend 2 golfing books that they simply must own.
Sure. Tom Doak's Anatomy of a Golf Course. Such a brilliant book, so well written. Tom has an amazing ability to talk about complex things in a very simple way, very easy to understand. I mean, it's probably sacrilegious to say it, but I think he took the concept of Alistair Mackenzie's golf architecture, his little simple book, and really took it to a new level. I think it's an incredible book. So that one. And the other one I would say is one of my favourite books is Jeff Shackelford's Cypress Point Club book. I know it's not, it's basically quotes and photos, but it was amazing foresight to have a photographer walk around with Mackenzie playing the golf course the day before it opened or the week before it opened. And it kind of shows Mackenzie in absolute, he was at the top of his game there, and such an incredible golf course that I would, if I had a time machine, if you asked the question, if you had a time machine, you could go back to any time in history and play a golf course, that would be it. To play Cypress Point just before it opened there. So I would say they're my 2 books. I still look at Shackelford's book all the time. It's got, and not because of the text, just because of the photos. It's an incredible, incredible book.
Before I let you go, Mike, you might let us know how listeners might find you online and on the socials, both in terms of OCM and golf renderings.
We're not the most active on social media. However, look, we try really hard to, we sort of say, we want to, we'll put a post out every week or whatever, but weeks slip by, it becomes months. But anyway, so we've got Twitter and Instagram, I think are both sort of OCM Golf. We've got a Facebook page as well. Our website is ocm.golf, which we were very pleased with when we got that as an address. And then me personally, Mike Cocking I've got Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. And then I've also, as you mentioned before, got Golf Renderings, where all my artwork is also on Instagram and Twitter as well. So.
Excellent. Well, Mike Cocking, we may have been a while organising this chat. I can assure you that the juice was worth the squeeze. It's been my absolute pleasure to host you on the pod. You might consider jumping back on me at some point in the future. Many thanks once again for your time and continued success to you, Ashley, Jeff, and the OCM team. Go easy.
Thanks so much, Shane. Okay, terrific.
Many thanks for tuning in. As usual, you can find us online at firmandfast.golf or on Twitter at firmandfastgolf. Please continue to like, subscribe, and comment. It really is appreciated. Until the next time, happy golfing.